When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about Edmure Tully in A Song of Ice and Fire and whether he gets overly hated or he gets just enough hate that he gets. I think I have a better opinion of Edmure than most people do in the community, and part of that is kind of due to Game of Thrones really made Edmure a joke by the end of the show.
And I like to think my experience has led to some small skill in statecraft and an understanding.
Please sit.
Right? Like the whole idea of Edmure, putting forth his name to be king, which is actually makes a lot of sense to do in Game of Thrones. But see, I think a lot of that is kind of rubbed off on the books specifically. And let's be frank here. Edmure does not have the best look even in the books either, but I want to go through some of the more memorable moments for him, especially his moments up to like the Red Wedding, and talk about what I think he did right, what he did wrong, and maybe why he did some of the things that he did, because he was put into one of the worst positions possible that he could have, right? As he has an aging father who's about to die and is sickly, and he's basically put into a situation of war, not of his own doing, but because of other people. But before we get into that, I did want to say thank you to my Patreons and members. I appreciate you guys for supporting me on this channel. If you don't want to become one, you do get videos early and an exclusive video each week. But thank you to those people. And let's talk about Edmure. So again, this is not exactly a character analysis of Edmure, so I'm not going to talk about everything leading up to like the events of Game of Thrones, like his early life. I want to specifically talk about when we start at the normal story. So as we start the normal story of a Game of Thrones, Edmure is set to take over being the Lord Tully, right? He's going to be a ruler of the Riverlands and of Riverrun specifically when his father does pass. And at this time, nobody really knows Hoster Tully's condition. Not even Catelyn. She doesn't know this information. And Hoster does this for a number of reasons. He tells Edmure basically, don't tell anybody, because if you start telling him that I am slowly dying, that's going to invite challenge, right? Then the Lannisters will be like, oh, well, Hoster is on his deathbed and Edmure is untested, unproven of who he is. They might try to make advances. And especially the rift building up at this time between the Starks and the Lannisters, you could kind of see that coming. And so Edmure respects his father, doesn't do any of those things. And it was a good move by Hoster, in my opinion, because I think that, yeah, it would have allowed the Lannisters to probably attack even more than they would have. But Edmure, the first event that really is important to understanding where everything kind of goes wrong for Edmure is Catelyn takes Tyrion of her own free will. She doesn't tell Edmure to, expect an attack or any of these things. Edmure is going to be working off of the same amount of knowledge that Tywin knows in the fact that Tyrion gets abducted by Catelyn and then they go kind of missing, right? And so that's going to already prompt kind of a war between the Tullys and the Lannisters. It's nothing Edmure did. Edmure had no time to prepare for this at all. And if you even think about the situation Catelyn is putting Edmure in, Edmure and the Riverlands control much fewer forces than the Lannisters do, right? Like if you even think about one of the armies, Jaime's army or Tywin's army, because there's two different armies, the Riverlords, with all of their combined strength, still would have not been really a full match for either one of those armies. And you also think about it from this perspective as well. The Lannisters have better equipped men. They are better trained men. Overall, are just a higher quality of soldier than Edmure's, right? And so every advantage is against Edmure, right? He doesn't have the funds that Tywin has. He doesn't have the army that Tywin has. He doesn't even have really the knowledge to go off of that Tywin has. And so the only advantage really Edmure has is he's playing a defensive battle. And you don't even really see the war start yet until a little bit later. Like this information takes a little while before Edmure really starts getting going, right? And so Edmure kind of in a preemptive, thing is trying to basically protect all of the border of the Riverlands. He's trying to, keep all of his lands safe. And the issue that he falls into is this idea that he spreads himself too thinly, and he already has less men than Tywin anyway. So even if they met at full strength, the Riverlords would still lose, right? And so when you do this idea, you're taking all your men, you're spreading them out to try and protect as much land as you can. And that is a noble cause because he's trying to protect his people. One thing you're going to really tell by Edmure is he's somebody that deeply cares for the people that he's ruling. It's a great quality. It's a great quality, but sometimes can get you into problems. And so that's why I look at Edmure and I go, he's not, a fool, an idiot. He's just a good man. He's trying to be a good ruler. And sometimes that gets in the way of being a good politician or, war general, right? It's the same thing that Ned runs into. I don't call Ned a fool either. And so early on in this war, you're having Gregor, who's making, raids under, not a Lannister banner, but just it's obviously him doing all these raids, trying to, get Edmure to respond to this point and this point. And you see Barrack's troops getting basically surprise attacked. But all of this is important because Edmure is basically trying to not be the person that makes the first move. Because up to this point, right, very, towards the second half of Game of Thrones, Edmure is kind of sitting here in his position where he's not really the acting lord of Riverrun. His father still is. He's still alive, and he's going to be even until Storm of Swords. But the one thing that he has is that as long as Robert's on the throne, he can have public sway. So if the Lannisters attack, they are painted as the bad guys. They are painted as the people that are the aggressors and all of that. Because Edmure and Hoster are right to still have faith, and Ned is Hand of the King right now, who has a great relationship with Robert. They have people at, the capital that will be fighting for them, and Ned is able to do that as well. He literally publicly decrees for the Mountain's Head, more or less, and calls Tywin to the capital. Before Robert dies, things are looking a bit better for the Tullys because it seems like you're going to have the backing of the capital and the north, and it's going to maybe back the Lannisters down. But unfortunately for Edmure, a number of things go wrong. One, the whole Robert situation goes completely against him. Robert dying is horrible for Edmure. Ned then being imprisoned and also dying, once again, it's horrible for Edmure. And so the Tullys get put in this really bad situation where you're trying to defend your land, but you don't have the men to do it. And so Edmure does make the mistake, in my opinion, of kind of even taking a conflict with the Lannisters at all. He should have been trying to play more of a guerrilla warfare, but not meeting Jaime or Tywin head on, trying to slow them down in any ways they possibly can, because the main objective that the Tullys should have had is buying time for the Stark forces to get south to then meet up with the River Lords. But even then, I don't know if that really would have worked, right? The Starks are pretty late. Like, they're hustling as fast as they can, getting across the Twins, all those things. And it still takes them a while to get to the aid of the Tullys and of the River Lords. And so you have a number of things happen. One, you have Edmure, who is having Lord Vance and Piper defending the Golden Tooth. They get basically destroyed by Jaime, which leaves Riverrun very vulnerable to an assault by Jaime. And so then you have this battle basically for Riverrun, where Lord Edmure, basically leading his forces, trying to defend his home, gets captured and also takes an injury. So everything kind of goes wrong really quickly for Edmure. And you also then have another army with Tywin and his brother Kevin, and they're kind of taking out some of the scattered border forces that I talked about earlier. So Edmure basically, in a very short amount of time, has gone from a decent position to a bad position very quickly, right? And so I don't look at Edmure and go, oh, he's a complete idiot. It's like Edmure, honestly, the best thing he probably could have done is just to basically play like a coward route and just hide in Riverrun and just wait for the North to come to his aid, which is more or less what happens, but it's not done that way because Edmure actually gives battle to Jaime. He just gets captured. He's very brave and noble for doing that. And so the thing that screws up Edmure early on in the war is him caring about, his land and his people and wanting to be very noble and honorable and all these things. Those things kind of work against him, very similar to like Ned, for instance. But either way, Edmure was screwed. Edmure had no way he was going to actually win any of these battles by himself. And he also might have been thinking, well, my sister Lysa, she'll definitely come to our aid. It's literally my sister, right? Well, the Vale doesn't come to help them. The North isn't able to get there, that quick either. So Edmure's completely on his own. And also, let's not forget the fact that the Riverlands are by far easiest land to conquer because there's not as much natural geography blocking paths to the Riverlands and all that. The Riverlands you can attack from basically any angle, right? And so you can run into this issue where it's like, okay, well, the Lannisters, they would be much more defensible, right? Even if the Tullys are able to go on the attack, which Hoster doesn't really want them to do, which is smart in my opinion. But it's not like, you're trying to invade the North, which is basically impossible to invade. Dorne, which is basically impossible to invade. It's not one of these other areas where it's just super easy to attack. The Riverlands are just in the straight up middle of the continent, so they just don't have those natural protections. It's much harder to try and hide or slow down the enemy. And so that kind of leads us really to a clash of kings, because Edmure, he gets freed and all of that, and he backs Robb, which again, that wasn't really his doing it either. If we look at the King of the North stuff, that was also really bad. That wasn't really, put up there by Edmure. He just backs what everybody else in the room was doing. I can't really fault him for that. I think a number of people would have done that. But that kind of gets us to a Clash of Kings. And so the next issue that kind of occurs with a Clash of Kings is, so he gets Robb basically to let the River Lords go back to their own places because, they're getting attacked, whether that's by, the Mountain or Lorch or whoever, right? And so this move is interesting because, again, it shows Edmure wanting a care for his people. He doesn't want his people to be being killed and slaughtered all over the place because he can't protect them. He wants his men and his lords to be able to fight them off and take their own battles, which does again play into Tywin's hand because Tywin is just going to have a bigger force than all those other places. But Edmure is kind of completely right in this. Like, Edmure does not have the foresight, or he doesn't, basically, he can't read minds or tell the future. Remember, the Lannister position looks really, really bad after book 1, right? The Lannister position at the start of A Clash of Kings is you've got Renly from the south blockading basically any food or resources from getting to the capital. You also have Stannis in the east at Dragonstone building up men and ships. Nobody's quite certain how many men he has because he's been able to basically eliminate anything coming out of Dragonstone through Saldor San's ships basically blockading Dragonstone, and then even Blackwater Bay as well. And so you also have, again, Robb then in the north, and then he's also going to attack the west. And so Tywin pretty much is surrounded on every single side. Right now, the Lannisters look like they're going to lose. And so, Edmure doing this where he's making it much harder for the Lannisters to just have easy pickings to resupply their armies and stuff like that, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And given the situation, it seems like the Lannisters are going to be easily on the out, whether it's by Robb and the Riverland forces or it's going to be because of Renly or Stannis or whatever. That just doesn't particularly matter at this point. So a couple things now all kind of happen at the same time. Robb then goes into the west and basically instructs Edmure to hold Riverrun and defend his rear. That's basically all he says. At the same time, you also have Roose, who has taken the crossroads, and he's basically just threatening Harrenhal at this time, even though he doesn't have the men to fully assault it. Edmure then makes a bit of a blunder. I will say this is the part where I think this is a blunder. Edmure commands Sir Helman Tallheart to leave the twins and aid Roose in retaking Harrenhal from Tywin. This to me was a horrible move because those forces were left there by Robb to ensure the loyalty of the twins in the Freys. And so by moving those forces out, it actually allows the Red Wedding to actually happen even more. And so that is a legitimate mistake. But again, if you're Edmure, how are you supposed to have the foresight that Robb is going to break his marriage contract with the Freys, and then also everything is going to go right for the Lannisters to allow the Red Wedding to actually occur? That even involves his sister releasing Jaime. Again, you can look back at some of these mistakes that Edmure made with foresight and, being able to take a bigger look at the world and go, okay, yeah, that's a bad mistake. But in this field where you need as many men as possible and you're trying to get rid of the Lannisters out of your land, put pressure on them, siege them, and all these things, that's not that bad of a move when you think about everything, the big picture, right? And Edmure even has a pretty decent plan, right? They kind of have the Lannisters pretty blocked in at Harrenhal. If Edmure, Lord Blackwood, and Lord Bracken all believe that Tywin could be caught between Riverrun and Harrenhal once Robb returns from the west, I think that's a legitimately good plan. You'd have them kind of boxed in. You wouldn't allow them to be able to, aid the west or aid the south really quickly. But Robb is in the west, and we don't know how long that's going to take if you're Edmure, right? Robb does not give Edmure a great indication of what he's doing in the west, how long he's going to be in the west. He can't really even send messages to Robb in the west either because he doesn't know exactly where he's going to be. You create a lot of issues, right? Because now you have Edmure who's going to be basically commanding and having to make decisions on the fly because Robb is not being able to be communicated with. And that kind of leads to the issue you have in the back half of A Clash of Kings. So as the war is breaking down, right, and Tywin moves, and he's moving, trying to get back to the west to attack Robb, basically, because Robb is doing exactly what the Lannisters were before, right? He is the one that's now attacking all of the cities in the west, or these little towns in the west for supplies and raiding them and all those things. So it's going to make Tywin want to come back to the west to basically meet him head on. And so Edmure, how is he supposed to infer from all of this knowledge that he's supposed to just let Tywin cross? right? Like, you easily, and this is the thing, right, is that Edmure finally uses some of the natural, land of the Riverlands to actually force Tywin into a pretty bad fight. And that leads to kind of the battle of the Stone Mill and of the Red Fork, because that's the crossing. And so Edmure fights this, and he actually gets a pretty stunning victory of the Battle of the Fords, which is kind of insane, right? He's actually able to repel the Lannister forces, who have way more men than Edmure does, and he's able to thwart them. And again, it's putting all this stuff into context. It's like, how then is Edmure supposed to realize that the Lannisters actually are going to have an alliance with the Tyrells that's then going to allow them, at this very surprising moment, move all of their forces from, the Harrenhal area, the Riverrun area, all the way down to the capital, and allow for then him to be able to beat Stannis? Like, there's just so many things going on here that it's like, okay, when you go back in hindsight, some of the moves Edmure makes don't look great, but given if you step into Edmure's shoes, none of these moves that he's making are particularly bad. Based on what the situation is, if they're able to bloody all of, Tywin's forces and forcing them into really bad battles where, Edmure can get the upper hand, that makes a lot of sense. And part of it is, yes, Edmure wants some glory and all those things as well. He wants to have some effect in this war and prove himself as a man. He even has a quote to Catelyn, like, he wants to prove himself to his dying father, right? Because he hasn't had that, while his father has been alive. So I look at all these things and I go, yeah, this wasn't a bad, mistake. Why wouldn't Robb just straight up tell Edmure what his plan was? It only takes a couple sentences. All it is, okay, Edmure, I want you to hold Riverrun, but not actually impede their crossing, because I want them to come back into the west, right? So then we can, kill them there, right? We'll have them boxed in. They won't be able to go to King's Landing if they're going to go support any type of battle in the south. They'll be focused on us, and then we can deal with whoever sits the throne after that. If he would have just said those things to Edmure, then everything would have been clear, right? But he doesn't do that thing. He just leaves it up to Edmure, like, well, protect Riverrun, defend Riverrun, defend his rear. What does that imply? Be able to defend Riverrun within any way you can. Well, defending the crossing is a way of defending Riverrun. It doesn't allow them to then, assault Riverrun. So I just think that, putting all this on Edmure makes no sense, given the context of the events that are happening in real time, not with hindsight. But that gets us then to Storm of Swords. And this is where I think it gets even more interesting, is like, okay, Edmure comes back, and he even, actually thwarted like an escape plan that Tyrion had hatched to get Jaime free, and he stops that. Kind of lucky, but again, how are you supposed to know that someone's going to mimic your voice and do all this crazy stuff like Tyrion had it done? But how is he then supposed to expect that his sister is going to release Jaime and basically screw up the entire war? Because that basically is a trickle effect and creates all these issues. And so Edmure is put in a really tough situation, right? Because he's won this victory. It should be a pretty happy time, but you also have your own sister releasing Jaime Lannister. Insane. Okay, so that's part of it. Edmure's not really as involved in that, right? But then you have this issue where, Robb and Blackfish come back. And publicly, they're like, oh, yeah, good job, Edmure. And then privately, they're berating him and talking down on him. And it's like, Robb, you are the one that made the mistake. It had nothing to do with Edmure. Edmure was doing his job, and you didn't give him actual instructions. It's not Edmure's fault. And so they make Edmure feel really bad and all this stuff, which is like, whatever. And then followed by this other issue where you have Willem Lannister and Tion Frey killed directly because of, Jaime Lannister being released. Lord Karstark kills them. Edmure is really smart. Like, everybody in the room is telling Robb, do not kill Lord Rickard Karstark. It is a terrible maneuver. And Edmure is basically the spearhead of that, right? He basically says, okay, let's make Rickard Karstark a captive, more or less. Well, Catelyn kind of like hops in on it, but they're in agreement for once on what they should do with Lord Karstark. And Robb doesn't listen. And so Robb makes another blunder, makes another mistake. He beheads Lord Karstark. But then you have Hoster Tully, who then dies, and Edmure becomes the actual lord in name. And people give him crap because he misses 3 arrows. Hitting a boat moving, you know what? I give Edmure the benefit of the doubt. He was pretty, pretty sad given his dad just died. He's become lord to the Riverlands, which have been basically completely decimated. They are losing the war now at this point, and his, quote-unquote king and his uncle, more or less, just berated him in private and completely stripped him of any, pride he had, or that thing that, like he says to Catelyn about it to his father. I'm going to make him proud. And now the action that he thought was going to make him proud is actually, backfired. So there's a lot that Edmure is going through. There's a lot Edmure is going through, and also Edmure maybe isn't the best archer in the world. I don't know. I don't think that's a crazy thought or whatever, but he gets some crap for that as well. And then even, this is the part that really gets me, is so after all this stuff happens and, Robb is trying to figure out how can I, go back and take the North and all these things, Edmure basically just gets a massive screw you. He's forced to marry Walder Frey's daughter's Rosalind to make amends for the Battle of the Fords and for Robb's marriage. So this is crazy to me. Edmure gets forced into a relationship because of what Robb did. Kind of crazy in my opinion. And you also think about Edmure, it's like, oh, he kind of throws a fit about this, but yeah, this is the woman he's going to have to marry for the rest of his life, have kids with. He has no choice in it. He doesn't know what the girl's going to look like. And he didn't get the Robb treatment. Robb was like, oh yeah, you can marry anyone. And the Freys are not described as being very good looking. And so Edmure getting a predetermined choice is not exactly a good sign if you're Edmure, because that just means Walder Frey can give him anybody. Somebody he hasn't been able to marry off because they're not very attractive or this or that, they have some sort of issue. Well, okay, that can just go to Edmure because they can't refuse. They're that desperate. And so Edmure has to do that, which he throws, somewhat of a fit, which, can't blame him at all. Cannot blame him. I'm just saying, cannot blame him. And so he is forced then to marry Rosalind Frey. And I also want to talk about something else. Think about what the plan is. The plan is, okay, Edmure, you're going to go back to trying to hold the Riverlands, and Robb, who is, that military is needed down south, has to go reclaim his own kingdom, leaving Edmure to defend the Riverlands against the Tyrells and the Lannisters. Basically, Robb just says, yeah, screw the Riverlands, can't really hold them, can I just leave now? It's like, okay, so if you're Edmure, you're sitting here at the prospect of, I'm going to marry this woman that I have never met before, and also I am basically getting abandoned. Nice. And all of this is because Robb lost his own kingdom, letting Theon go to the Iron Islands, and then also marrying some other girl because she slept with her. So all of these issues, Edmure hasn't been part of them. He is the one getting screwed out of the entire thing. So, yeah, he then goes to, the Red Wedding, and he finds Rosalind quite attractive, and all this stuff goes on, and they have the bedding ceremony, and all during this whole time, the Red Wedding's going on, and again, makes Edmure look really bad, and it's like, dude, the guy is now happy about his marriage. He really likes this girl. It's his wedding night. You think he's worrying about all these other things going on outside the bedroom door and all these things going on? Like, okay, kind of crazy, but whatever. Edmure then gets imprisoned, as one does. We get to, later on in Feast for Crows, and Edmure's basically being used as a means to basically getting the Blackfish to surrender Riverrun. Edmure basically realizes this is a death sentence because that's never going to happen. The Blackfish is just never going to give him up for him. And so you have this issue where it's just like, what is Edmure's life worth living anymore, right? His sister has died. His other sister has basically abandoned him at this point. His father's dead. His mother's dead. Everyone that Edmure knew in his family is basically dead. His child with Rosalind, if it's a male, will probably just straight up be killed. So it's not a great look for Edmure, and he just basically has nothing left. And then here you have Jaime, who he finds himself prisoner to a second time, and is forced and blackmailed basically to give the castle to the Freys and the Lannisters because there's no other option really. Now, he does take some wisdom and he allows the Blackfish to escape. Again, shows the wisdom that he has. It basically allowing the Blackfish to escape is basically saying that, oh yeah, this isn't over. The Tullys still have a chance. And that's where we leave the character really. Edmure is going to be transported to the west, more or less, to live with Casterly Rock. but that doesn't seem to be the end of the character. And so by the time we get to this whole end of this character, I want to take a second to think about the true story of Edmure Tully. It's a lot of decisions and things that happen with Edmure in his life that are almost either out of his hands, or if we are actually in his shoes during some of the events happening, you might have made the same choice because he doesn't know everything that's going to happen in the future and all these things that there's no way he would know. So a lot of his decisions are pretty rational and make a lot of sense in my opinion. Just it doesn't work out because of outside circumstances with communication or knowledge he doesn't know of, or things happening in the world that he has no way of knowing. But let me know what you guys think about Edmure Tully, and I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Bye, guys.